You probably already heard of .NET, especially if your computer runs Windows. So what exactly is .NET? In this video, we'll answer this question. As computer science people, we all know about libraries. These are, of course, not the libraries where you get books. In programming, there are some very common tasks, like reading and writing files, drawing some GUI components on screen, and so on. We don't want to program these tasks from scratch every time. So we write these programs once, then package them in some reusable format called libraries. Then next time, if we need to perform the same task again, we just use the program in the library. It's nice and simple, and in fact, these days it's virtually impossible to write a program that does something useful without using a library. That's all great, except for one thing. Libraries are programming language specific. This means the same functions have to be implemented again and again for each language. It also means that even if you are already an expert in one language, when you try to learn a new language, you will have to relearn all the basic libraries again because they all have different APIs in different languages. .NET actually comes from the idea to create a library, or a bunch of libraries in fact, that can be used by any programming language. This is the base class library part in this diagram. You may be wondering, how is this possible? Well, conceptually, it's actually not too complex. We'll have an intermediate language, and all the other programming languages can be compiled into this intermediate language. We then build our libraries on top of this intermediate language, so all the programming languages can then use these libraries. And when we try to run the applications, we run them in a runtime environment similar to the Java virtual machine. So these three layers, the runtime environment, called Common Language Runtime or CLR, the intermediate language called Common Intermediate Language, and these libraries called Base Class Library, not Common Class Library. And these three layers together form the so-called .NET framework. Of course, not all programming languages can be compiled into the intermediate language. If you check out the linked wiki page, which is here, you can see the languages that can use the .NET framework. And there are quite a few of them. But in practice, the most commonly used .NET languages are still the Microsoft ones, in particular C# and Visual Basic. There are a couple of additional terms that are kind of important. First is a Common Type System, or CTS. CTS specifies all possible data types and programming constructs supported by the Common Language Runtime. And in order for a programming language to run on .NET, the language must support a subset of CTS, and this subset is called Common Language Specification, or CLS. So almost all of them are common this, common that, except the base class library. Anyway, here comes the confusing part. From .NET to .NET Core, then back to .NET again. The first version of the .NET framework was released in 2002. Since then, it has gone through many updates, and the current version is 4.8. A major characteristic of .NET is that it's part of Windows. This is quite unlike other languages and frameworks. For example, if you want to use Java, you just download JDK, you install JDK on your computer. And if your application uses part of the Java library, that part of the library will be packaged together with your application so you can deploy your application anywhere. .NET is different in that it comes with Windows, so you either have it or you don't, depending on if you use Windows. Also, applications built with .NET does not have the library packaged with the application. So to run the application on another computer, you need to make sure that that computer runs Windows and it has the same version of .NET. The original design decision for .NET was probably because they want to tie people to Windows. Later, Microsoft realized that it may not be the best idea. Whether they thought it was a technical mistake or a financial one, I don't really know. In any case, they decided to create a new .NET framework based on the same specifications like CTS and CLS, but this time the framework is open source and cross-platform. Now it works very much like JDK. You download it, you install it, and you can run it on Windows like Mac OS and Linux. For several years, .NET and .NET Core were developed in parallel, and it will be clear which one you talk about because they have different names. And then they decided to stop further development of .NET and rebrand .NET Core to .NET. So after .NET Core 3.1, the next version of .NET Core actually became .NET 5. If you only look at name and version number, you may think that .NET 5 is the next version after .NET 4.8, but no, it's actually .NET Core. Anyway, in this class, we'll use .NET 5, which is the latest version. In many cases, I'll continue to use the term .NET Core, either out of habit or to avoid confusion. Just know that .NET 5 is actually .NET Core, not the old .NET. .NET 5 is an important release. Before .NET 5, in addition to .NET and .NET Core, there's actually a third .NET framework called Mono. Mono was originally developed by a company called Xamarin, which tried to port .NET to Linux and Mac OS. Later, the company was acquired by Microsoft, and Mono was used mainly for mobile app development. Starting from .NET 5, .NET, .NET Core, and Mono became this single framework that supports development on all kinds of different platforms. And here are some additional readings. Please read Chapter 1 of the Pro C# 9 book. If you are interested in more background of .NET, you can check out these two linked articles. Thanks, and see you in the next video.